This lecture is going to be looking at the traditional Marxist theory of crime. We'll deal with the neo-Marxist theory in a separate lecture, as that's not, it's a development on this theory. So just like with the functionalists, this lecture is going to look both at the causes of crime, according to the Marxists, as well as what they see as the function of crime in society, or as Marx has put it, the ideological functions of crime. But we're going to start off by looking at how the Marxists see crime as being caused in society. And one of their biggest ideas, as is ever with the Marxists, is the idea of criminogenic capitalism. And what this means is that capitalism in and of its nature is causing criminal activity. It is criminal. Capitalism is criminal. But they're a little bit more specific on what that actually means. So first of all, they talk about utilitarian crime. And Gordon, surname, not first name, talks about how the capitalist foci leads to crime. So Gordon identified 4 foci that he said caused crime. The first one being greed. And what that he meant was that in capitalism, we are told that we should always want more, that we should always be aiming to get more, which makes us greedy. So we're always going to be reaching for that next thing, the bigger, better thing. Now, personally, I'm very aware that I do this, particularly when it comes to technology. I always want the newest, best thing that I can afford. But what Gordon says is by wanting these things, wanting this bigger, better thing, it can push people into criminal activity. Me, personally, not into crime, not committing crime to get my tech. But some people may see that as the only way to get the things that they need. The next one he talks about is profit. And this links mostly into white collar and corporate crime, more so corporate crime. But companies, businesses, they're not out to be nice. They're not out to just deliver a service necessarily. They are out to make profit. That's the business model of capitalism, that you are to create profit. To be a successful business, you must create profit. So some companies, some businesses will turn to criminal activity, corporate crime, in order to increase their profits. Examples such as Enron, and Amazon to a certain degree, when it comes to their business practices, could be considered criminal. His third one is competition. Capitalism pits people against each other. It's not about the greater good, what the good for the many. It is about the good for yourself and for you to be top dog, you to be the best. And to do that, people may turn to criminal enterprise or criminal activity in order to be the best. And again, we can see this in the corporate world, particularly with things like stock exchanges and stock market, where people may engage in insider trading or other less than legitimate means in order to be the best trader that they can be, because the nature of the industry is that you are rewarded for being the best. We can also link this into a little bit into relative deprivation, but that also more so links into the last one, which is materialism. But with relative deprivation, we are led to believe that we need to keep up with the Joneses. We need to keep up with our neighbours. And when you see that they have the new best thing, be it car, TV, clothing, mobile phones, any of that sort of stuff, you want it because you are wanting to be the best. Capitalism makes us want to be the best. And in order to do that, people may turn to criminal enterprise to either get the thing itself or to get the money to get the thing that they want. So a lot of what we see in terms of this capitalist foci, these elements of capitalism, can lead to criminal activity because it's pushing us constantly for more. The second element of criminogenic capitalism, and this links mostly into non-utilitarian crime, is this reaction to exploitation. So we can argue that when people are working, when they're not in the managerial roles, or even if they are in the managerial roles, they may well feel that they feel exploited, feel oppression, all of those things that we've talked about previously regarding Marxism and the oppression and exploitation of the workers. And in order to release that frustration, they turn to criminal enterprise. And this is where we're talking about things like graffiti, assault, explosions of anger or explosions of frustration, which can cause people to the outline of why people commit crime. So we can see here that both non-utilitarian crime, so crime that doesn't get financial gain, and utilitarian crime can be caused by capitalist foci, by the nature of capitalism. The next, however, what we need to do is we need to evaluate this. So the first evaluation is this idea of determinism. So because capitalism is an external force upon our behavior, it can be argued that, well, we aren't slaves of capitalism, if you like. We do have agency, we do have choice in our behaviors, and therefore this whole theory is reliant upon the fact that we don't have this agency or choice, that our behaviors are entirely shaped by capitalism. The next evaluation is that it is reductionist. Again, it is taking a very, very complex idea, why people commit crime, and it is saying the cause is capitalism. Everything can be linked back to capitalism, not taking into account all of the other factors, both sociological, psychological, biological, that can play a role in why people commit crime. And finally, if capitalism was the cause of crime, it wouldn't exist in communist states. However, it does. Crime rates in these communist countries, perhaps not the most reliable or trustworthy due to the nature of the states, but there is still criminal activity. So it can't be capitalism that's causing this criminality in countries where capitalism is not the economic system at hand, that they are socialist. So therefore capitalism shouldn't be the cause, yet crime still exists. In Russia, for example, there is or was, say, under when it was socialist, there was high levels of criminality. Now this was hidden to a certain degree. People were disappeared if they went against the state, but they still had police forces, they still had prisons, so therefore there was still a criminal element that required those services. So let's look now at the ideological functions of crime. And for the Marxists, one of these ideological functions of crime is that it maintains social inequality. It is about keeping social inequality going. It is about making it so that the rich stay rich and the poor stay poor. So the one way that it maintains social inequality is through selective lawmaking. Now, what we're talking about here is that the laws are written to benefit the ruling class and to manage and maintain or create a criminal class within the working class. Now, Chambliss argues that the law is pretty much shaped to protect property, to protect profits, and who are the people that have the property and profits? It's the rich and powerful. So he calls the rich and powerful a criminal syndicate, suggesting that they in themselves are a criminal or a criminal group that's all about keeping themselves in power at the expense of the working class. Box goes on to argue that the rich are often engaged in activities which result in death, injury, fraud, and theft, but these activities are protected under the law because it's those people who are writing the laws. And the example he gives is health and safety laws. So these laws are created to give the appearance of protecting everybody, but they give a massive loophole for employers if something were to happen to their employees. So for example, the employer could say, well, we were following all the guidelines, we were doing everything that we were supposed to be doing. It's their fault they didn't follow the procedures that we have in place. So therefore it is not our fault, and therefore scapegoating that worker. And then you've got Snyder. German governments are reluctant to pass laws which regulate the activity of businesses and the rich because they're the ones that are paying into their re-election funds. They're the supporters of these politicians. So, for example, and we see this a lot in America, politicians are reluctant to pass gun control laws, which from recent history or as far back as you can look, are massively needed to prevent school shootings, mass shootings, accidental shootings, all of these things. And I read recently that the biggest cause of death in the US of children is guns. Not accidents, not illnesses, not cancers, not anything else, guns. Yet the government is still reluctant to pass these gun control laws because the National Rifle Association, the NRA, provide so much money to their re-election campaigns and have so much power over these politicians because they have this monetary control. No politician wants the NRA to remove that money because if they don't have the money, they can't stand for election, or they're going to struggle in the election. And even in the UK, we have this issue as well. And we particularly saw it during COVID with the number of companies and rich and powerful friends who were given contracts and COVID-based money, but didn't actually do what they were contracted to do. Now, in any normal situation, you would imagine if you paid a company for a service and they didn't do that service, you'd ask for your money back. If you employed a cleaner to come and clean your house and they did not do that, you're not going to pay them. Or if you've had already paid them, you're going to ask for a refund. Yet none of these companies had that money, were asked to return that money. Now, again, I read recently somewhere it's something like £14 billion in fraud from COVID-based policies, yet the government's doing nothing about it. So we can see how these policies and how these laws are shaped and written to benefit these rich and powerful people and the businesses and things like that in order to maintain the rich and powerful. The second part of maintaining social inequality is selective law enforcement. And this comes from Ryman. And what this means is, although we are told we are all equal under the law, it's a human right, it's written in the Declaration of Human Rights, it's written in the European Declaration of Human Rights, it's written in UK law, that's not actually true. And the number of examples we can see of different groups in society being treated differently under the law. Now, Ryman talks specifically about how the ruling class are able to commit crimes, but not have them investigated or classified as a crime. For example, social security fraud can put somebody in prison for a long period of time and paying back how much they've been overpaid. And a lot of the, not all the time, but some of the time, these can be legitimate mistakes, accidents, where somebody has been overpaid in their benefits or in their social security, unaware that this is the case, they are then charged with fraud. And yet, tax evasion is not prosecuted as much, particularly for those who are very rich and very powerful. For example, Jacob Rees-Mogg and the I can't think of what his name is now, but the owner of the Daily Mail, both have their companies registered offshore in the Isle of Man, on the Republic of Ireland, European, or various other places, so that they don't have to pay corporation taxes. Yet they're some of the biggest perpetrators of pushing for benefits frauds to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, and these people to be put in prison and all of this sort of thing. So what Ryman is suggesting is that the rich remain rich and the poor remain poor and powerless because the law is not applied equally regardless of your class or your socioeconomic background. The second ideological function of crime, according to the Marxists, is how crime can prevent revolution. Now, if you remember, the Marxists are all about trying to explain that eventually there will be a proletariat revolution where the proletariat will rise up against the ruling class, against capitalism, overthrow them all, and go into a communist utopia. Now, Marx was obviously writing well over a century ago now, and this proletariat revolution has yet to occur. And if you remember back to your discussions on Marxism, this could be argued because there hasn't been the right organic intellectual to come about yet, or there could be this idea of dual consciousness where we are aware of our exploitation, we just don't care because the capitalism foci override that belief or that understanding that we're being exploited. It's just kind of like, yeah, I don't care because I still want my stuff and I still want all of these other things that capitalism tells me I want to do. So here we're first of all talking again about selective law making and law enforcement. But what Peirce even is talking about is the fact that there is a almost false class consciousness regarding the law. So what Peirce is arguing is that we know that these laws are not equal, but at the same time, they're written to appear as if they are equal. And again, that comes back to that dual consciousness. We know that it's not equal, but they're written in a way to make it seem like it, so it's easier for us to kind of go, but we're all equal under the law. And he uses the example here of the health and safety laws, where it looks like these health and safety laws are there to protect those workers. It's there to ensure that they're not being exploited, when in fact there are glaringly massive loopholes that allow for this to happen. Another example that we can talk about is the 2007 corporate homicide law. So this was introduced for times when a company's employees are killed at work and it is down to the negligence of the company. However, in the first 8 years after the 2007 corporate homicide law, only one successful prosecution. And now the issue with this corporate homicide law is, or the reason it was brought in, was before 2007, you could only bring a criminal case against a person. So you had this issue of, well, who's at fault here? And you can get the Nuremberg defense, which is, it's not my fault, I was doing what the person above me told me to do. It's not my fault, I'm doing what the person above me told me to do. And a good example here is the Deepwater Horizon explosion oil rig disaster, where they were trying to find who was at fault for this oil rig blowing up in the Louisiana Bay area. And every time they spoke to a BP executive, they were passing it on to the next person up. And by the time they got right up to the board of BP, the board members were kind of like, well, we don't know what's going on a day-to-day on an individual rig. We're big picture people, not micro picture people. So it's not our fault. We don't deal with that. So there was this issue where people weren't able to be prosecuted because there was uncertainty and no clarity on who was to blame. So the 2007 corporate homicide law brought about the idea that you could prosecute a company. Now, obviously, this doesn't lead to jail time, or prison time, I should say, because you can't put a company in prison. But it could lead to companies being forced to pay considerable amounts of money to the victims' families in compensation for the death of their loved one. Obviously, it's difficult to put a monetary value on a person's life, and sometimes the amounts that have in the prosecutions that have happened, the amount that has been determined to be paid is next to nothing to some of these big corporations. It's a drop in the ocean regarding their profits for that year or that quarter or whatever. So what Pearce is saying is that by making the laws appear equal to everybody, they are preventing the revolution because they're creating this false consciousness that we are all equal under the law. The second way that crime prevents revolution is through media depictions of criminals and media distortion of crime. Now, we will look at media and crime later on in this unit, but here what we're seeing is that the media are used to create this idea that criminals are deranged, disturbed individuals. There's something wrong with them. They're not normal. And because of this, they can then use this idea, and there are criminals out there who are deranged and disturbed individuals. You just have to look at a number of the serial killers that have been around, such as Jeffrey Dahmer or Charles Manson, people like that. But at the same time, some organic intellectuals who are trying to bring around social change are also put forward as being deranged and disturbed. For you often see in the press Greta Thunberg, although not portrayed necessarily as a criminal, she is often they bring out the fact that she is autistic and that she is this and she is that, and the media, particularly right-wing media, do portray her in a very unflattering way. And because of that, it could be argued that she is unable to bring around the revolution that she is trying to do. And I personally think she's doing a fantastic job at what she's trying to do. We saw it with Martin Luther King. He was arrested multiple times during the civil rights movement before his assassination, which painted him as this criminal entity. Malcolm X, again, same sort of scenario. So by having these media depictions of these people as being deranged, disturbed, untrustworthy, criminal people, they're preventing revolution because it is not, these are not people that you want to follow. They're not people that you want to be associated with in a legitimate way, preventing the proletariat coming together and rising up in revolution. Now, to evaluate this, because obviously this is not the answer, it's not the theory that's correct, because otherwise we'd only be covering this and not all the others. But the first one is we do have to take into account that lawmakers are elected officials. So they can't be seen to only be supporting the interests of a small minority of their constituents or the electorate, because the others will just turn around and go, well, I ain't voting for you. Why would I vote for somebody who's not going to represent my interests? It's actually going to put me at a disadvantage. So they do need to take into account the fact that these people want to be re-elected. That's part of the purpose of a politician, is to want to be re-elected. You also have to take into account that this whole theory ignores the victims of the crime. Just like the functionalist approach, the Marxists are a macro approach. They are a structural macro approach. So they are looking at the impact of crime or the causes of crime or the function of crime for society. So they're ignoring the impact on the victim. Okay, so for the Marxists, they are ignoring the key fact that most of the victims of crime are the poor and working class. Whereas if their theory was accurate, or more accurate than we can see, we would see more criminal activity against the ruling class. But we don't. The majority of victims of crime are the poor and the working class. So that brings us to the end of our traditional Marxist theory of crime, and we have covered all of these key questions, which you should be able to now have notes on to follow up later.